Hello and welcome to the World Economic Forum in Davos. Coming up in this special programme from the Swiss Alps, we speak to the French finance minister about his plans to tax digital giants like Google and Facebook. And charting the effects of Brexit through the property market, we find out where businesses are moving to with one of the biggest global players in commercial real estate. It's a call we've heard from politicians and NGOs for years in Davos. Tax the rich and big companies more in order to reduce inequality. The French government has decided to go after the giants of technology with its so-called GAFA tax. But can this measure work without EU-wide support? I've been discussing this with French Finance Minister Bruno Le Maire. You've announced plans that you're going to tax digital giants from the 1st of January this year. How will this tax work?
It will be a tax on the turnover, the digital turnover, and the framework that has been designed. You should have more than 750 million euros of digital turnover to be in the scope of the taxation. That's for the world framework, and at the national level, you should have a level of incomes of 25 million euros. Then in that case, you will be in the scope of the taxation.
How will you define digital revenue?
It will be defined by the revenue, I mean the chiffre d'affaires and the turnover. And that's the single figure that we have to be very clear and to have that fair and efficient taxation.
It's a problem the OECD has highlighted in the past, is that it's difficult to separate the digital economy from the rest of the economy. How will you be certain that you'll target the companies that you're trying to get to with this tax?
But I think that with the turnover, you have a very clear red line to define which companies will be the scope of the taxation and which won't be. Because I don't want to use that mix between data and non-data economy, digital economy and non-digital economy to escape a fair taxation. Because when you are looking at the current situation is quite clear. You have the biggest companies of the world, the digital companies, not paying the same level of taxation than the smallest one, the SMEs, because we are not able to tax the digital economy. So that's why we have taken that decision to have a taxation on the digital turnover. Everybody is aware of the level of digital turnover of those companies for the sake of having a fair taxation and an efficient one.
But the lines of that are quite difficult to define. If you take, for example, a car maker that starts selling connected car services through their company, that's technically going to be digital turnover. So how do you define to make sure that you're going to target the companies you're trying to target with this tax?
From a technical point of view, since we have decided to have a taxation on the turnover, it's really easy to define what is exactly the digital turnover of each of the biggest companies of the world. It would have been far more complicated if we had defined another basis which would have been based only on the question of data. But the turnover is, I think, a very simple way of taxing the biggest companies. I'm not explaining that's the best solution. I'm explaining that this is the one on the table and that is the easiest one. But I look forward for the OECD to presenting a new proposal. And as soon as there will be an OECD proposal, of course, we will adopt the OECD proposal. But we can no longer wait to have a fair taxation of internet giants. I'm waiting for a solution coming from the OECD. And nothing is coming. So that's why we have decided with the French President Emmanuel Macron to move on and to have national taxation. And other countries across Europe are doing exactly the same. The UK is doing the same. Italy, Spain are doing the same.
But
Austria is doing the same. Because there is a sense of justice from our people that are waiting for more taxation, justice, more justice in the international taxation, and that's exactly what we are doing. But once again, we are supporting all the efforts from the OECD to put a new proposal on the table, and when there will be a new proposal, we will adopt it.
Why weren't you able to get agreement on this tax at a European level?
There are some countries which are still reluctant to taxation, digital taxation. You have Sweden, Ireland, Finland, Denmark. I think there is still room for maneuver. And with my German counterpart, Olaf Scholz, we will do our best to convince those 4 last countries to join the consensus. There is a consensus of 23 member states to have a fair digital taxation at the European level. I hope that we will be able to convince by the end of March those 4 last countries to join the consensus. It would be far better to have a European solution.
The Irish position is that this should be done at an OECD level because they say that if it's done just in Europe, that will disadvantage the European position versus other developed economies. How do you respond to that?
My response will be quite simple. There is something more important than the OECD. That's the European people. European people are waiting for more justice. They want to have a fair globalization. They want to have a new capitalism, which would be based on justice and fairness. That's more important than the OECD. I have a lot of respect for all the OECD is doing. They're doing a tremendous job to have a fair taxation of digital giants. But the truth is that for the time being, there is no solution on the table. We can no longer wait. And if we want to fight against the rise of populism across Europe, we need to take decisions. Waiting is not the right answer to the rise of populism across Europe. Deciding and taking right, fair, strong decisions is the best way to fight against the rise of nationalism and populism across Europe.
Moving on to the subject of Renault, Carlos Ghosn has resigned from his position. Are you confident the alliance will survive under new leadership, and who's going to lead the alliance?
I'm confident, and I think that through that new governance of Renault, there will be a strengthening of the alliance. And the first task of the new chairman of Renault will be to reinforce the alliance, because this is in the interest of both France and Japan to have that strengthening of the alliance. The alliance now is the first car producers in the world. It means that they have a huge responsibility, and the responsibility is to gather our forces to have more funding for innovation, for disruptive innovation, for electric cars, for autonomous cars. That's the key question, and it will be the first task of the new chairman of Renault.
What discussions have been had as regards Carlos Ghosn's exit package from Renault?
It is up to the new governance to think about that and to take the appropriate decisions about the way Carlos Ghosn will leave Renault.
Okay, Bruno Le Maire, thank you very much for speaking to us. Brexit is a major talking point here in Davos. Plenty of concern over how the UK's departure from the EU will play out. Now, businesses have been making their contingency plans for some time now, and one company that's been at the centre of that is the property giant Jones Lang LaSalle. They rent and manage commercial property all over Europe.
Well, businesses have to put a contingency plan in place. We don't know what the outcome will be, whether it's a no deal or a delay to the deal, but it doesn't matter whether you're in pharmacy or whether you're in finance or whether in manufacturing. You've had to put a plan in place. And a lot of that has been, particularly if you're in a regulated business, moving roles to other locations.
And does that mean that you've really seen a boom in your business of dealing with all these different areas of commercial property if companies are having to take on extra space, for example? Well,
at first we thought that people would relocate their offices from London to elsewhere. But in reality, what's happened is that a lot of the particularly international companies have expanded their space elsewhere and just retracted their space in London. The ultimate effect hasn't been that great, but there are certain cities that have felt a slight increase in space demand, but they're spread out.
Where are you seeing that demand increase?
So I'd say a lot of financial companies have been focusing on Frankfurt. A lot of the pharma companies have been focusing on Amsterdam. But other cities that have captured international sort of relocations and space requirements are definitely Paris and Dublin.
And is that something that you're seeing companies making long-term decisions about taking, be it a long lease or investing, in something that's going to last a long time?
I think it's mostly about people taking an extra 10% of office space. So it's actually, overall, I wouldn't say it's material, but it's helped move markets forward in certain locations. At the same time, though, businesses have been upgrading their workplace. This war for talent is very much reflected in the type of office you create for your people. So that has created slightly more demand everywhere, including London, which has seen its highest activity of leasing in the last 6 months, which is contrary to what people would have thought.
So, in fact, there aren't empty offices going in London because companies are moving out?
No, I think the real result of Brexit and this uncertainty is that, unlike other continental European cities, the development pipeline in London is starting to slow down. And we're not seeing that in places like Paris or Frankfurt.
What sort of plan has JLL made for Brexit?
Well, we've only got a small part of our business that is regulated, but we've had to think of alternative locations for a few roles. But it's, you know, we're like a lot of businesses. It's a very, very tiny proportion of our business. There is a contingency plan. I'd say the biggest challenge is trying to forecast the year ahead, because if there is a no deal, then the outcome is much more significant on most businesses.
Okay, Guy Granger from Jones Lang LaSalle, thank you very much for speaking to us.
Thank you.
That's it from us at the World Economic Forum, but you can find more of our coverage on our website and on our social media pages. Until next time, goodbye from Davos.